Zuck goes on offense over the Facebook whistleblower's testimony to Congress. Could the government theoretically mint a $1 trillion coin to avoid a default? And Adele preps for her long-awaited comeback with a new single. Wednesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning, this is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Wednesday, October 6th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo.
There she is. J-Wags, J-Town. How you doing? How you feeling? How's life in the Wagner household?
We are slowly coming back to life. My daughter got sick last week. She was out of school Friday. And then over the weekend, my husband got really sick. And then Sunday, late Sunday, I just started to feel terrible. And so it went through the house. It was kind of wild. So at least my daughter was back at school this week.
Good.
One thing that I was thinking about is that I just was really stuffy. I had a very typical cold, right? Which, obviously.
You sound a little stuffed up.
I am. I'm not 100%. But I probably would have pre-COVID forced myself to come back yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? So that would have been our just work ethic, and that's what we would have done. And I had said I'll work remotely yesterday because I just didn't think it was the right thing to do, to come into this office coughing and sneezing. It's just gross. It's gross in general, especially during COVID. I did take a COVID test and I was negative. And then, our bosses basically said, no, we want you in the office. So take the day, just get better, take the day and come back when you're ready. So I just did think that was a healthier way of handling if you're sick, right? Just take time, rest, try and get better. Don't force yourself to come into the office when you're not feeling well. I think we'll just be healthier long term.
Oh, for sure. We talked about that. Remember when we did that Silver Linings podcast about some of the good things that could come out of the pandemic? That was one of the things we talked about. Maybe Americans will stop forcing themselves to go to work when they're sick and getting everybody else sick. So I hope so. I hope that's one of the things that changes here.
All right, I missed a lot of Facebook discussions. Let's get right into what's going on here. Mark Zuckerberg hitting back at claims made by the Facebook whistleblower that the social media giant prioritized profits over the health of its billion users, and it regularly promoted hateful content intended to keep users hooked. Frances Haugen testified in front of Congress and laid the blame for what she called choices that go against the common good directly at the feet of Zuckerberg. He responded in a letter to employees saying, her claims, quote, just aren't true, don't make any sense, and don't reflect the company that his employees know. And I wanted to read one thing from his argument that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
He said, the argument that we deliberately push content that makes people angry for profit is deeply illogical. We make money from ads, and advertisers consistently tell us that they don't want their ads next to harmful or angry content. And I don't know any tech company that sets out to build products that make people angry or depressed. The moral, business, and product incentives all point in the opposite direction.
I think the problem with that is the argument is not that Facebook set out to build a product that makes everybody angry. The thing is, it builds a product that wants people to get engaged, and the things that people get engaged about on the internet are things that people get angry about,
right,
and make people distrustful of one another, etc. He basically, he also said, how could our product be addictive and bad if so many people around the world use it, which is kind of an iffy argument. It's again, back to the cigarette argument, right? But I thought that this hearing yesterday with the whistleblower was pretty interesting and revealing. It got into a lot of the nitty-gritty about Facebook's algorithms, sort of what it chooses to promote, which was interesting because a lot of these hearings that we've seen in the past when it comes to Facebook usually just turn into these shouting matches with senators complaining about censorship and misinformation. So this was a nice change of pace, I guess. Kevin Roose is a technology columnist for the New York Times. He published a piece right before that big Facebook outage the other day. I thought it was a very smart column. He basically made the point that all of this stuff that we're hearing about Facebook shows not that Facebook has become too big and too powerful, but actually that it's much weaker than anybody thinks. And his argument was that, companies that have their best days ahead of them really don't do stuff like look for ways to get, 4-year-olds to use their product during play dates, as we've discussed. And just a quick quote from that article, that column that I thought was sort of a good encapsulation, quoting here. A good way to think about Facebook's problems is that they come in two primary flavors: problems caused by having too many users and problems caused by having too few of the kinds of users it wants: culture creating, trend setting, advertiser coveted young Americans, end quote. His point essentially, right, culture on the internet now is made on TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter to a lesser extent. Facebook is like where your parents go to argue about, vaccines.
It's true. It is really true, and it doesn't mean everyone. I tend to think that the hype around the younger demographic is I get why as TV we're always like we want that young demographic, but people with money are older, so I don't totally like get it. And it's funny, like when we started Need2Know, we were young, and I was like, we're not. But then we eventually got older, and I always thought I don't want to play to college kids exclusively. First of all, it would be inauthentic because I am a certain age, and not that you can't have a wide audience, but I was like, I don't want to just specifically go for that audience and try to be cool and young. We are who we are. But it's also like the older you get, the more money you usually have. So I don't always understand why advertisers are going for that demo.
It's like when you become 35 and you age out of the TV demo, right? Like 18 to 34, I think, is the demo that everybody wants. But it's like, no, now I've got my earning power. Now now I can actually buy the stuff on the commercials, right?
I'm no longer living paycheck to paycheck. So advertise to me. I'm a prime target here.
Right.
Okay, on the coronavirus beat, rapid at-home COVID tests should become much easier to find soon now that the FDA has authorized a new antigen testing kit that it says will double U.S. capacity in the coming weeks. The test is from Acon Labs. It is a nasal swab that gives results in 15 minutes. It's not as sensitive as the PCR tests, but it is cheaper, easier. You could do it at home. As you know, if you've tried to get your hands on the current at-home testing kits on the market, they have become very hard to find. Yours truly took an at-home COVID test this past weekend, and it was interesting. I had to read the instructions 5 times just to make sure I was doing it correctly. But I had bought a bunch of COVID tests when they first came out because I was at I think Dwayne Reed one day in the city actually. And I'm like, COVID, they have COVID tests? So I bought a bunch of them, and this was the first time I needed them.
Was it a swab or a finger prick?
It's a swab.
You don't have to do it as like dig into your brain like the ones they do at the
No, but they
clinic,
make you do it for longer. So the ones that I've had done by professionals, it's like they jam it in and it's uncomfortable, but it's still 3 seconds. This is you need at least 15 seconds in each nostril. And then you put it into it's crazy. It's like you kind of put some sort of liquid in
solution,
and then you wait 15 minutes, and it's kind of like if you have ever taken a pregnancy test where it's like one line not pregnant, 2 lines pregnant, same thing. It's like 1 line COVID, 1 line not COVID, 2 lines COVID. And I took one, my husband took one, and it gave us peace of mind for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the key, right? I think that's the key because we've talked about this. Even if these tests aren't as good as the PCR test, and sometimes you can argue those PCR tests are actually too good because they're catching any virus in your nose, even if it doesn't actually make its way into your respiratory system, which I think is why a lot of people who are vaccinated test positive, even though they're not actually really positive for COVID. It's just that there's COVID particles in their nostrils. Also, just on this same topic, I want to make a mention of this. One of the current at-home testing kits, hopefully not the one you took, it's made by the Australian company Illume. It's being recalled over concerns that it's just throwing off way too many false positives. So be on the lookout.
I guess I'd rather have a false positive than a false negative.
Yeah, that's true.
But no, that wasn't the brand that we took. But interestingly, though, you could do it. As I can do it on my daughter, right? So I could give her an at-home test if I just do the swab, which I found to be really, really helpful because I think in this country right now we're not putting enough emphasis on testing. There's so much just like politicization of the vaccine and stuff like that. And testing it should be cheap and pretty easy at this point. I've been following closely what's happening in Israel because they're a few months ahead of us in terms of vaccinations. Couple things to note. Fully vaccinated in Israel right now is considered 3 doses. So if you just have your 2 doses of the vaccine and it's been more than 6 months, that is not considered fully vaccinated, which I found pretty fascinating. The other thing is what they did before they sent all the kids back to school is they sent them at-home COVID tests. And they tested everybody. And it's not foolproof. Obviously, you could get COVID after, but it's like a good baseline to have. And after doing it myself and seeing how easy it is, the fact that like Israel and a bunch of other countries, that we haven't just made these tests readily available and if not free, super cheap, I think is criminal.
They should be sending them in the mail. I mean, we should just like get them regularly, right? Yeah.
JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the country, banning business travel and in-person meetings for unvaccinated corporate employees effective immediately. Starting next year, unvaccinated employees will also have to pay for the COVID tests that they'll be required to regularly take in the form of payroll deductions. The policy does not extend to bank branch employees. But Carlo, it sounds like we're getting to this place where you just can't really have a job in corporate America if you are not vaxxed, although I will say, it feels like there's not really enforcement. I mean, we have policies here, and I'm not like throwing anyone under the bus, but no one asked to see my COVID test or my vaccine card. We have rules. And I just think that's in general, right? Like any store you go in, it says must wear a mask if you're not vaccinated. I've yet to have anybody ask me to see my vaccine card. And we're in New York where that actually would be acceptable, right? If you're in any other part of the country, I think that they would laugh at you if you were like, I need to see your vaccine card. As these rules are in place, I don't know if they're being enforced.
Well, I think that's a really good question. I got carded this weekend for the first time. We went to brunch and we sat inside for the first time. I sat inside in a restaurant in a long time. But they asked for my vaccine card. I whipped that thing out. I was like, oh hell yeah, baby! I got it in my wallet. Check it out. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, I think back to your point though. I think what's happening here is JP Morgan Chase is just an example here. It's going to be that you're sort of a pariah in a lot of like white collar jobs if you're not vaccinated. And what they're doing by basically saying like, no, you guys you don't get any of the perks of these jobs. You don't. I guess I don't know. Is meetings and business travel?
No,
I don't know.
That's
maybe
reason not to get vaccinated.
Yeah, maybe not. But also just on the same note, Southwest Airlines just became the latest carrier to mandate vaccines for all its employees, so they follow United and American. Delta CEO came out over the weekend and said he's still on the fence about whether they're going to do it, but I assume that they are. But there's still no vaccine mandate for air travel, which I find a little bit. I thought that was going to be one of the first things that we saw after the FDA full approval. I hope that that's coming. I think that would go a long way for people getting people back on planes.
Well, that's the whole thing about mandating the vaccines for passengers. It's like if you're mandating vaccines for passenger, if you're not going to mandate vaccines for passengers, why are you making the employees mandate it? There's just no point in some ways. I don't really understand.
It's also random.
Yes. And by the way, this was not a dig. I love this company that I work for. I don't want to.
No, I know.
I think it's an honor code. Like, I think that my assignment manager, doesn't think I'm going to lie to her about getting a negative COVID test. But I'm just saying that it's like, how strict are companies in terms of enforcement?
Well, and who are the enforcers? I mean, it's in some ways the fact that we're making, and I agree with these vaccine mandates like in restaurants in New York, but we're putting the onus on like a maitre d' or some overworked waiter to have to check vaccine cards. Like that's not really fair to them. That's not their job. I don't know what the answer is, though.
No, it's tough. All right, so switching gears, could the U.S. Treasury mint a $1 trillion coin to avoid a federal debt default if Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling in time? It is a crazy idea, but one that's been gaining traction in some policy circles as a way to get around the possibility of a looming default. In theory, the U.S. Mint could strike a single platinum coin, giving it $1 trillion value, and then immediately deposit it into the Fed. The government would then have enough money to pay its bills without needing Congress. Again, in theory, there's plenty of reasons why this might be a terrible idea, including the possibility it could lead to hyperinflation, even though the coin wouldn't actually be in circulation. No one really knows, though, for sure, because it has never been done. Is this something people are talking about that we may do,
Yeah.
Carlo? Wow.
Yeah. This is gaining some traction in sort of like some of the wonkier policy circles, at least that I follow. And enough so that they've actually asked at the White House press briefing and the Treasury Secretary, both of whom have called it a gimmick and said that it's not going to happen. But I think the fact that this is even a question now being asked at the White House shows you that they're calling it the mint the coin movement, has sort of entered the mainstream. So it's kind of an interesting, thought experiment, I think, because again, you could do it, right? They could actually do this. It's not like it can't happen. It probably won't happen, and almost certainly won't happen. I think what's more likely to happen with this looming debt default is what Biden floated yesterday, which is that they're going to do a carve out on the filibuster, basically a one-time change to the Senate rules to prevent Republicans from filibustering the debt limit. But the clock is ticking here. We got like less than 2 weeks here, and nobody wants this. It's just crazy.
Something we got to keep an eye on overseas. China's Air Force has been flying a record number of jets over Taiwan in the last several days ahead of the island's National Day celebrations this weekend. Beijing's increasingly aggressive posture towards Taiwan, which considers itself a sovereign nation, is raising geopolitical concerns that China could be preparing for a military confrontation. No one thinks it's going to happen imminently, but it would be something that could happen in the coming years.
Yes, again, this is something that has definitely got people in these sort of geopolitical circles talking and worried about. The White House has warned China over its provocations with Taiwan. Taiwan's president came out yesterday and says there would be, quote, catastrophic consequences if China were to invade. This is something that seems, I think, more likely than not to happen in the near future, just based on what we've been talking about for more than a year now, right, which is this increasingly aggressive stance from Beijing, and combined with sort of the deteriorating relationship between the United States and China. And I think the fact that, nobody really did anything when Beijing effectively took back control of Hong Kong last year showed them, I'm not saying that we should have invaded, but I think it shows China and that the Xi Jinping regime that if they wanted to invade Taiwan and try to reunify, who's going to stop them? We're not gonna.
I think that you make a really good point. I'm just thinking back, and the most that was done actually was that the UK, Boris Johnson, basically said that if people were living in Hong Kong and they wanted to come back to the UK, they could.
Right.
But if you remember, this kind of hit pop culture. This was the whole thing with John Cena. Do you remember he had to apologize to Chinese audiences because he was out
so
promoting. He was promoting one of his Fast and Furious movies. And he said Taiwan is the first country to watch Fast and Furious 9. And because he called Taiwan a country, he issued an apology, I think in Mandarin. It was crazy. And it's one of the examples that people look at when they're like, if you're wondering if China has influence and pull here, I mean, what's going on with the NBA? I mean, you hear these players come out and talk about social justice issues in America and around the world, and never once do they mention China, which is literally putting Muslims in concentration camps. Why is that?
Yeah, it's their economy, and they're extremely influential, like you said.
Okay, are you ready for the new era of Adele? The singer is releasing.
I am.
By the way, that was a rhetorical question, Carlo. I feel like you were like, okay, do I need teacher? Jill, the teacher is back. Do I need to answer this question? You're like, the economy, they're influential. Okay, let's talk Adele, the singer releasing her first single in 6 years next week. A brief snippet of that song, it's called Easy on Me, was posted to her social media platforms, and it features some signature piano chords over a black and white video of her driving. Adele also recently updated her website and social accounts to match the mysterious billboards that have been spotted in cities around the world last weekend, promoting the number 30.
Fans suspect that'll be the title of this new forthcoming album, because that's kind of like how she titles her albums, based on the year that she had, the age she was when she wrote them. Although its existence and release date still have not been confirmed, but I think the betting odds have this album coming out in November. Taylor Swift, by the way, her re-recorded album Red, also coming in November. So it's going to be a great time to break up with your boyfriend, I guess.
I have long thought that Adele was going to look back on the decision to name her albums after her age was going to be a bad decision in the long term. Like,
You
that's
think?
cute when you're 18. I mean, what was her first album? I don't remember, like 70.
21, I think.
21.
Yeah.
And it's like, at a certain point, you know, like 51,
Right.
like where's the longevity in this idea? I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you.
Does she hit 40 and she's like, okay, we're going to just call it like Reflections or something like that? All right, time for M2K. More to know before we go. Some evidence now that an anchor from one of those dozens of container ships waiting to get into the ports of Southern California accidentally snagged that pipeline, causing the oil spill that has dumped thousands of barrels of crude into the Pacific. Also some reporting that came out yesterday that basically, Carlo, they knew that there was some sort of leak going on, that officials had a warning about it, but they couldn't find it for hours, which basically prevented them from doing whatever damage control they could do.
Yeah, people were complaining about a smell of oil as early as Thursday, and the Coast Guard didn't acknowledge that there was a spill until Saturday. So obviously that's something that needs to be figured out. Why was there that delay there? I want to mention this story just to get on the record. Danny Fenster, he's an American journalist from Detroit who was arrested in Myanmar last May on charges of sedition. He's been slapped with a new charge as he awaits trial in one of that country's most notorious prisons. Myanmar's military regime, remember, they took power in a coup earlier this year. They've not said what this charge is. Fenster has not been able to see any evidence of whatever he allegedly did. He can't meet with his lawyer. This is a horrific miscarriage of justice happening there with an American journalist. And I just want to thank Hannah, who's been on us about covering this story, which is a big deal in some sort of like journalism circles and in Metro Detroit, where he's from. But we want to try and get it a little more national attention.
The Red Sox beat the Yankees last night 6-2 in the American League wild card to advance to the playoffs, where they're going to face the Rays. Yankees ace Garrett Cole was pulled in the third inning after giving up 3 runs. The National League wild card is tonight between the Dodgers and the Cardinals.
Oh, God, that game last night, I had to turn it off because it was too late, but just a miserable game to watch. Garrett Cole makes $324 million, and he chokes in October. It's ridiculous. Anyway, workers at all Kellogg's cereal factories in the United States are now on strike, halting the production of Frosted Flakes, Rice Krispies, other breakfast cereals made by Kellogg's indefinitely here. This is the latest food strike during the pandemic. It follows similar job actions at Frito-Lay and Nabisco. Basically, all of these workers saying they're working 12-hour days, 7 days a week during COVID, with all of the people who are out sick, and they're negotiating new contracts to try and get more money and better benefits.
Francis Collins, the director of the NIH, is retiring. Collins is Dr. Fauci's boss, who served in the position for 12 years and led the pandemic response under 2 presidents.
And finally, Britney Spears slamming her family in a new Instagram post, accusing family members of being complicit in that years-long conservatorship, and thanking her new lawyer for, quote, changing her life.
All right, that is what you need to know for Wednesday, October 6th.
Good to have you back, Wags. See you, gang, tomorrow.